The narrow lanes of Bath glistened under a soft, unrelenting drizzle. Lydia Whitmore tugged her coat tighter around her as she made her way through the quiet Georgian streets, each cobblestone echoing her hurried footsteps. The weight she carried was heavier than the satchel on her shoulder. It was the weight of truth, a truth she had hidden for far too long. She paused beneath the overhang of an old bakery, the scent of fresh bread momentarily stirring something familiar in her. It reminded her of the mornings she once spent laughing in the kitchen with Oliver Harrow, back when things were simpler, before everything had unraveled. He didn't know. Not truly. He had walked away before she had a chance to speak, before she could say the one thing that might have changed everything. She pulled out the envelope she had been carrying for weeks. It was creased and damp at the corners, addressed in her own hand. Mr. Oliver Harrow, The Crescent House, Lansdowne Road, Bath. Her fingers trembled. Inside was a single photograph and a short letter. Not an accusation. Not even a plea. Just the truth, plain and unadorned. Lydia had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The confrontation. His reaction. The storm of emotions that might come crashing down between them. Yet standing here, soaked and uncertain, all her carefully planned words fled. A distant rumble of thunder broke her thoughts. She took a step forward. She had come to Bath for a reason. Not to beg, not to explain, but to deliver what was his. She reached the tall iron gates of the Crescent House and stared at them. It was as grand as she remembered, perched proudly atop the hill, its windows glowing with the warmth of a family gathering. She wondered if he was inside. If he was happy. Suddenly, the gates creaked open. A young girl in a smart coat stepped out, chatting into her phone, then turned and saw Lydia. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing her curiously. Lydia's voice caught, but she managed to say, "I'm here to see Oliver Harrow." The girl tilted her head. "He's not here, I'm afraid. He left for London last night. Business, I think." Disappointment tightened around Lydia's chest, but she nodded. "I see. Thank you." As the gates shut again, Lydia clutched the envelope tighter. There would be no dramatic doorstep meeting. No trembling revelations. Just a decision. She turned away from the Crescent House and walked back into the rain, not realizing someone had been watching from behind one of the curtains above, eyes fixed on the street below. The rain had subsided by the time Lydia reached the quieter part of Bath. She wandered aimlessly, her thoughts drifting like the last few droplets on her coat. Her heart felt heavy, burdened by the unanswered questions and the knowledge that her journey had only just begun. It was in one of these quiet streets that she found herself outside a small café, tucked away between a bookstore and a florist. A warm light spilled from the window, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee was an invitation she couldn't refuse. She needed to think, to process. Stepping inside, she shook off the dampness from her coat and took a seat by the window, where she could watch the world go by. The café was mostly empty, save for an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner and a couple sitting at a table, whispering in low tones. Lydia ordered a tea, her hands still trembling slightly from the encounter at the Crescent House. She had known it would be difficult, but she hadn't expected the wave of emotion that had followed her departure. The photograph in her bag was still there, burning a hole through the leather of her purse. She couldn't bring herself to look at it again. Not yet. Perhaps when she was more certain, when she could face the truth without crumbling under its weight. Her tea arrived, the steam rising from the cup like an invitation to a conversation she wasn't yet ready to have. She took a sip, letting the warmth seep into her bones as she tried to steady her thoughts. The girl at the gate had told her Oliver had gone to London, but Lydia knew that was a lie. Oliver didn't leave Bath unless he had to, and even then, he would have notified her. He would have sent word. There was only one person who could have made the decision to send her away without so much as a word. Catherine Harrow. Lydia's hand tightened around the cup, her fingers digging into the porcelain. Catherine, Oliver's mother, had always been a force to be reckoned with. The matriarch of the Harrow family, she had a way of controlling everything around her, especially Oliver. Theirs had never been an easy relationship, but Lydia had always hoped that love could break through the walls Catherine had built around her son. But now, standing outside the Crescent House, Lydia knew that Catherine had played a part in the lie. She had to have known about the child, about the baby she had born for Oliver. There was no way she couldn't have. Catherine had always been in control of the family's secrets, and Lydia was certain that this one was no different. As the minutes passed, Lydia's anger grew. She had spent years trying to convince herself that Oliver's silence had been a mistake. That he had simply been too young, too naive to understand the consequences of their actions. But now she knew the truth. It had never been a mistake. Oliver had known about the baby, just as Catherine had. They had both chosen to pretend it never happened. Lydia took another sip of her tea, but it was bitter on her tongue now. The warmth of the cup no longer soothed her, and her thoughts were as tangled as ever. She had come to Bath to confront Oliver, but she had underestimated the depth of the lies. There was more to this story, and it went beyond Oliver and Catherine. It involved every member of the Harrow family, and Lydia was determined to uncover it all. Her mind raced as she recalled the conversations she had overheard as a child, the whispers of secrets long buried. The Harrow family had always been known for their wealth, their influence, their power. But Lydia knew better than anyone that beneath the facade of perfection lay a tangled web of deceit. And now she was part of it. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. It was time to go. She had to find answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she had them. The cafe was no longer a place of comfort. The lingering scent of coffee and the soft hum of conversation felt like a mockery of her own turmoil. As she stepped back into the street, she felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the weather that was cold. Bath had a way of making her feel like an outsider, like she didn't belong. But she couldn't stop now. She had to go to the Crescent House, to face Catherine, to get the answers that would finally free her from the shadows of the past. The street lights flickered as she made her way back, her pace quickening with each step. She could feel the weight of the letter in her bag, the photograph still burning a hole through the fabric. It was a letter she had written years ago, a letter she had never sent. It had been addressed to Oliver, and it held everything she had ever wanted to say to him. Now, it seemed like the only way forward was to face him, to confront the past and the lies that had kept them apart. As she reached the gates of the Crescent House once more, she saw that the windows were dark. It was quiet now, almost too quiet. There was no sign of life, no movement from behind the curtains. Lydia hesitated for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. But she couldn't wait any longer. The time had come. She pushed open the gate. The wind picked up as Lydia approached the grand entrance of the Crescent House, the imposing structure standing silently in front of her. It had always felt like a monument to the past, a reminder of all the things she had hoped to forget. And yet here she was, back in front of it, ready to confront everything she had buried deep within her heart. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, its rusty hinges protesting the weight of the years. Lydia's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. She had come too far to turn back now. Every step she took towards the house felt like a step closer to the truth, and she wasn't going to stop until she had it. As she reached the door, Lydia's hand paused just above the brass knocker. It had been years since she last stood in this place, and the memories flooded her. The sound of laughter, the warmth of the fireplace, the moments of happiness she had once shared with Oliver and his family. But all of that seemed like a distant dream now, a dream that had been shattered by the lies and secrets that had kept her away. With a deep breath, she lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed through the house, reverberating in the empty hallways. It was a sound she had once associated with home, but now it felt foreign, as though she were trespassing on ground she no longer belonged to. A few moments passed before the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was Catherine Harrow, her expression unreadable. The years had not been kind to her. Her once vibrant hair had dulled, and the sharpness in her eyes had softened. But she still had the same commanding presence that Lydia remembered. "Lydia," Catherine said coolly, her voice betraying nothing of the surprise she must have felt. "What brings you back here?" Lydia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped past Catherine into the house, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. The place hadn't changed much. The same antique furniture, the same portraits of long-dead relatives on the walls. Everything was just as it had been before, but it felt like a different world altogether now. "I'm here to talk about the past," Lydia said finally, turning to face Catherine. "And about Oliver. And the baby you've tried to erase." Catherine's face tightened, and for a moment, Lydia saw a flicker of something, perhaps guilt, perhaps anger, pass through her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by the cool, composed mask that Lydia knew all too well. "The past is over, Lydia," Catherine said, her tone colder now. "There's nothing left to discuss." Lydia shook her head. "You're wrong. There's plenty to discuss. You've kept us both in the dark for too long. You and Oliver. You both knew about the baby. And you both decided to pretend it never happened. But it did. And I'm not going to let you erase it. Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Lydia thought she might slam the door in her face. But instead, Catherine stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. Come inside, she said, her voice softer now. Let's talk. Lydia didn't hesitate. She walked into the foyer, her footsteps echoing in the large empty space. The house felt colder now, the shadows stretching longer as the day began to fade. The fire in the hearth had long since gone out, leaving only the faintest glow from the dying embers. Catherine led Lydia into the sitting room, where they sat across from one another in silence for a few moments. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with years of resentment and betrayal that had never been addressed. Finally, Catherine spoke. I never wanted you to find out, Lydia. I never wanted you to be part of this mess. But I couldn't stop it. Oliver insisted on carrying on with his life, as if nothing had happened. And I didn't know how to stop him. Lydia's eyes narrowed. You didn't stop him? You were the one who made him do this, weren't you? You manipulated him. Just like you always do. Catherine flinched, but her composure remained intact. I did what I thought was best. You have no idea what it was like, Lydia. The pressure, the expectations. The Harrow name means something. It means everything. And Oliver. Oliver couldn't understand that. He wanted to throw it all away for a mistake. But I couldn't let him. Lydia's voice trembled with emotion. It wasn't a mistake, Catherine. It was a child. My child. And you took that away from me. You took away the one thing I ever wanted. Catherine's eyes softened for a moment, but then she shook her head. You don't understand, Lydia. It wasn't just about you. It was about all of us. The Harrows have a reputation to uphold, and Oliver was supposed to be the future of that name. He couldn't be burdened with a child. Not in that way. Not with you. Lydia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. That's enough. I don't want to hear any more of your excuses. I came here to confront you, not to listen to your lies. I want to know where my son is. Where is he, Catherine? For the first time, Catherine faltered. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a brief moment, Lydia saw the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. I don't know, Catherine whispered. I don't know where he is. Oliver. He left. And I didn't know what to do. I never wanted this to happen. Lydia's heart raced. What do you mean you don't know? You're his mother. You should have known. I didn't, Catherine said softly. I thought I could control everything. But I couldn't. And now it's too late. Lydia took a deep breath, her hands shaking with frustration. She had come all this way for answers, but the truth was more elusive than she had ever imagined. Catherine Harrow might not have all the answers, but Lydia knew one thing for certain. She wasn't leaving Bath until she found her son. The pieces of the puzzle were still scattered, but Lydia was determined to put them together. The room grew colder as Lydia took a seat opposite Catherine, her eyes never leaving the older woman's face. She could feel the tension between them, thick and suffocating. Catherine, ever the picture of control, sat silently, her fingers absently tapping the arm of her chair. The silence stretched between them like a chasm that neither seemed willing to cross. Lydia's mind raced. Catherine had admitted that she didn't know where Oliver had gone, but Lydia wasn't sure if she believed her. There was something in the older woman's eyes that didn't quite match her words, something that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. But whether it was fear, guilt, or something else entirely, Lydia couldn't say. You're lying, Lydia said finally, breaking the silence with a harsh whisper. You know where he is. You always have. Catherine's gaze snapped to Lydia, her expression hardening. I don't know what you think you're trying to accomplish here, Lydia, but I can assure you that you're wasting your time. I don't have the answers you're looking for. Lydia's voice was steady but full of a quiet fury. You do. You have all the answers. And you're just too afraid to admit it. You don't want me to find him. You don't want anyone to find out what you've done. The older woman's lips parted, as if to speak, but she stopped herself. The truth hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. The weight of the years spent hiding, suppressing, and controlling had finally come to a head. Lydia could see it now. Catherine was not just protecting Oliver. She was protecting herself. "What are you afraid of, Catherine?" Lydia asked, her voice softer but no less intense. "What happened all those years ago? What happened to my baby?" For a long time, Catherine didn't respond. Her eyes shifted nervously, and for a moment, it seemed as though she might crumble under the weight of Lydia's questioning gaze. But then, with a deep breath, Catherine spoke. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "None of this was supposed to happen." Lydia leaned forward, her eyes never leaving the older woman's face. "Then what was supposed to happen, Catherine? What did you think would happen?" Catherine's hand shook as she reached for her glass of water, her fingers unsteady as they gripped the rim. She swallowed hard, clearly struggling to keep her composure. "Oliver was young. He was reckless. He didn't understand the consequences of his actions. And when it all came to light, I couldn't let him face it alone. I couldn't let him ruin everything." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their implication. Lydia's heart sank as she realized the extent of what Catherine was saying. This wasn't just a matter of a child being born. It was about reputation. It was about power. It was about a family that would do anything to protect its name, no matter the cost. "Ruin everything?" Lydia repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You're telling me that you let a child suffer because you were worried about how it would look?" Catherine's expression faltered, guilt creeping into her features. "I didn't know what else to do. We couldn't let the Harrow name be tarnished. We couldn't let Oliver be dragged down by something like that." Lydia clenched her fists, the frustration bubbling up inside her. "And so you erased him. You erased my son. You forced me to live with the pain of not knowing what happened to him. You stole his future and mine." Catherine's face was pale, the guilt finally breaking through her facade. She closed her eyes for a moment, as though she couldn't bear to look at Lydia. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt you. But it was the only way to keep things from falling apart. You have to understand that, Lydia. I was trying to protect you. Both of you." Lydia's eyes filled with tears, the weight of the betrayal crushing her. She had spent years trying to move on, trying to forget the child she had lost. But now, sitting across from Catherine, she realized that the truth was even darker than she had imagined. "You didn't protect me, Catherine," Lydia said, her voice breaking. "You destroyed me. And you destroyed him." There was a long silence as Catherine sat there, her face etched with regret. For the first time, Lydia saw the true extent of the damage that had been done. The lies, the secrets, the manipulations. All of it had been done in the name of protecting a family's reputation. But the cost had been more than anyone could have anticipated. "I'm sorry," Catherine whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted you to suffer like this. I never wanted any of this to happen." Lydia stood up, her knees weak as she prepared to leave. There was no closure here, no resolution. The truth had been revealed, but it was a truth that couldn't fix what had been broken. "Sorry doesn't change anything," Lydia said quietly, her back turned to Catherine. "Sorry doesn't bring him back." As she walked toward the door, Lydia's mind was filled with only one thought: finding her son. The truth had finally come to light, but the journey was far from over. And nothing would stop her from uncovering the rest of the story, no matter where it led. Catherine's voice faltered as she continued, her gaze never quite meeting Lydia's. She looked as though she were trying to pull the words from somewhere deep inside her, words she had buried for years. "It wasn't just about Oliver," Catherine said, her voice low and filled with a weight that made Lydia's heart race. "It was about a lot of things. Things you don't understand." Lydia's mind reeled. She leaned forward, her frustration mounting. "Then help me understand, Catherine. Help me understand why you did this to me. To my son." Catherine's hands trembled as she clasped them together in her lap, her fingers interlaced tightly. "You never knew the whole story, Lydia. You don't know what it was like before all of this happened. Before he was born." Lydia's pulse quickened. She had never heard Catherine speak like this before, and it terrified her. "What do you mean? What happened before? What aren't you telling me?" Catherine's lips parted as though she wanted to say something, but she closed them again, taking a deep breath. Finally, after a long silence, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "It's about your father." Lydia froze. The mention of her father, the man who had always been a distant and enigmatic figure in her life, sent a chill down her spine. Her thoughts spun. What could Catherine possibly know about her father that she didn't? What does my father have to do with any of this? Lydia asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and dread. Catherine sighed deeply, her gaze finally lifting to meet Lydia's. Everything. He was the one who made sure Oliver was erased from your life. He was the one who pressured me into it. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. My father. Catherine nodded, her face pale. He knew about Oliver. He knew everything. But he couldn't let it come to light. Your family's reputation. It was all about protecting that. Lydia's mind struggled to process this new revelation. She had always thought of her father as distant, as someone who was never truly involved in her life. But now, it seemed that he had been the orchestrator of the lies that had kept her away from Oliver, from the truth. Why didn't you ever tell me? Lydia whispered, her heart breaking with the weight of the betrayal. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? Catherine's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to explain to you that your father was the one who wanted to protect the family name at all costs. And when he was born, your father saw it as a threat. A threat to everything he had built. To everything we had built. Lydia's chest tightened as the pieces began to fall into place. Her father, the man she had always looked up to, the man she had always hoped would protect her, had been the very one who had kept her from knowing the truth. The truth about her son. The truth about Oliver. What did he do to Oliver? Lydia asked, her voice breaking as she felt the tears welling in her own eyes. Catherine shook her head, her voice shaking. I don't know. I never knew what happened after he was taken. But I was told that he was sent away, that he was given to someone who would take care of him. Far away from us. Far away from Bath. And we were told never to speak of it. Your father. He made sure of that. Lydia stood up suddenly, the force of her emotions overwhelming her. So my father made sure that my son would never be a part of my life? He took him away from me? And you? You just let him? I didn't have a choice, Catherine said softly, her voice full of regret. I didn't want to, Lydia. But your father made it clear that it was for the good of the family. For the good of all of us. The room felt as though it were closing in on Lydia. Her father, the man who had always seemed so far removed from her life, had been the very one to make the decision that had torn their family apart. The weight of that revelation was almost too much to bear. I have to find him, Lydia said, her voice firm and resolute. I have to find Oliver. I can't just let this go. Catherine nodded, her face filled with sorrow. I understand. But Lydia, please, be careful. There are people who will do anything to keep the past buried. People who will stop at nothing to protect the lies. Lydia didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to find Oliver. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. I don't care what they try to do, Lydia said, her voice low and determined. I will find him. And I will make them pay for what they've done. With that, Lydia turned and walked out of the room, leaving Catherine behind, her words hanging in the air. The past had been uncovered, but the road ahead was just beginning. Lydia had made a promise to herself, and she would stop at nothing to keep it. The weight of Catherine's words hung heavily in the air as Lydia walked away from her aunt's house. Each step felt like an eternity, the streets of Bath now a blur of cobblestones and grey skies. The familiar surroundings seemed foreign, as though Lydia had just woken from a long and troubling dream, and now reality was slowly sinking in. Her father, the man who had always kept his distance, who had been a figure of authority in her life, had been the one who decided to take Oliver away from her. And now, Catherine had confirmed what Lydia had feared for years, that Oliver had been hidden from her, his existence buried deep in the past, all for the sake of family honor. Her mind raced as she replayed every moment with her father, every word spoken, every glance exchanged. She had always known that he was distant, but she had never suspected that he was capable of such deceit. He had erased her son from her life without a second thought. He had sacrificed the love of his own daughter for the preservation of his family's reputation. The very thought of it made Lydia's chest tighten with anger and grief. But as much as she wanted to hate her father, she couldn't. There was too much history, too many years of complicated emotions. And more than anything, she needed answers. She needed to find Oliver. She had to know where he was, who had taken him, and what had become of him. There was no turning back now. Her footsteps led her to the Avery family estate, a sprawling mansion nestled at the edge of Bath, surrounded by high iron gates and ivy-covered walls. Lydia had been here countless times as a child, but today, it felt like a foreign place. It was a place filled with too many memories, memories she could no longer trust. Lydia hesitated for a moment before stepping through the gates, her hand tightening around the handle of her purse. The house loomed before her, its gray stone walls cold and imposing. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew she couldn't stop now. The truth was waiting, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter what. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. The grand entrance hall was lined with portraits of her ancestors, their eyes seemingly following her as she walked through the silent corridors. Every step she took felt like it echoed through the hollow halls, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Lydia made her way to the study, the place where her father had always retreated to when he needed solitude. She had always hated this room, with its dark wood paneling and oppressive atmosphere. It was a place where secrets were kept, and Lydia knew that her father's greatest secrets were hidden here, buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten memories. As she pushed open the door, the faint scent of old books and leather filled her nostrils. The room was just as she remembered it, except for one thing. Her father's desk was empty. The chair where he had always sat was vacant, and the papers that once cluttered the surface were gone. Lydia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Had someone been here recently? Or had her father known that she was coming? The thought sent a chill down her spine, but she pushed it aside. She wasn't here to play games. She was here to find answers. She began to search through the drawers of the desk, pulling out old letters, financial statements, and photographs, but nothing seemed to tell her what she needed to know. Her fingers skimmed over each item, her frustration mounting with each failed attempt. And then, at the very back of the drawer, she found it, a small leather-bound notebook. It was worn and faded, its pages yellowed with age. Lydia's hands trembled as she picked it up, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she would find inside, but she knew it was important. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes landed on a single name, Oliver Avery. Her breath caught in her throat. There, written in her father's neat handwriting, was a list of dates, names, and places. It was a record, a trail of Oliver's life that Lydia had never known existed. It was all there, the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. Lydia scanned the pages, her eyes darting over the names and locations, trying to piece together the puzzle. There was a name that stood out to her. Dr. Edward Hargrave, a name she had never heard before. The more she read, the more it became clear that Dr. Hargrave was the key to unlocking the mystery of Oliver's disappearance. Lydia slammed the notebook shut, her mind racing. She had a name. She had a lead. And now, she knew exactly where she had to go. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since she had learned the truth, Lydia felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't going to stop until she had found her son. She would follow this lead, no matter where it took her, and nothing would stand in her way. Lydia took a deep breath and stepped out of the study, the notebook clutched tightly in her hand. The truth was out there, and she was going to find it. Lydia's heart raced as she stood outside the grand gates of Dr. Edward Hargrave's estate. The name from her father's notebook was now etched in her mind like a burning flame, and she knew that her next step would be critical. This was the moment when everything could either fall into place or shatter into a million pieces. Dr. Hargrave's name had appeared too many times in connection with Oliver's disappearance for it to be a coincidence. She had to confront him, to understand what role he had played in her son's life. The estate in front of her was imposing, its stone walls adorned with creeping ivy, and the large windows glimmered in the fading light of the afternoon. The building stood like a monument to secrecy, its high walls seemingly designed to keep the world out. Lydia could feel the weight of her decision bearing down on her, but she refused to turn back now. She had come too far. With a deep breath, she walked up to the front door and rang the bell. The sound echoed through the still air, the sharp chime sending a ripple of tension through her chest. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could send her tumbling into the unknown. A few moments passed before the door slowly creaked open, revealing a tall, thin man in his late 50s. His face lined with age and experience. His dark eyes studied her for a moment before he spoke. "Yes? How can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth but cold. Lydia's heart skipped a beat. This was him. Dr. Hargrave. The man who had been a part of Oliver's life. The man who might hold the answers she desperately sought. "I need to speak with you," Lydia said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "It's about my son. His name is Oliver Avery." At the mention of Oliver's name, Dr. Hargrave's expression shifted slightly, though he quickly masked it with a neutral smile. Lydia could see a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Come in," he said, his voice much softer now. "We can discuss this inside." Lydia hesitated for a moment before stepping over the threshold into the dimly lit hallway. The atmosphere inside the house was heavy, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dust. She had always heard whispers about Dr. Hargrave, about his eccentricities and the strange happenings surrounding his work, but nothing had prepared her for the eerie stillness of the place. Dr. Hargrave led her into a small sitting room, where a fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls. The room was lined with shelves of books and medical journals, some of them appearing to have been untouched for years. The old man gestured for her to sit, but Lydia remained standing, her eyes scanning the room for any sign that might lead her closer to the truth. "Please sit down," Dr. Hargrave insisted again, his voice gentle but firm. "I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that your son is safe. He has been in my care for many years now." Lydia's breath caught in her throat at his words. "What do you mean, in your care? I don't understand. How could you have kept him from me all this time?" Dr. Hargrave sighed, his eyes flicking to the fire for a moment before returning to Lydia. "There are many things you don't know, Lydia. Oliver's situation was complicated. Your father was not as he appeared. He made decisions that he thought were in your best interest, but those decisions came at a cost." Lydia's mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of what Dr. Hargrave was saying. She had known for years that her father was hiding something, but she had never imagined it could be this deep, this tangled. The man she had trusted had made decisions about her son's life without her knowledge, without her consent. "Why didn't you tell me?" Lydia demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why didn't you come to me when you had the chance?" Dr. Hargrave's face softened, but his gaze remained steady. "I wanted to, Lydia. But there were circumstances. Your father insisted that I keep you in the dark, that you would be better off not knowing the truth. He thought it was for the best." Lydia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "For the best," she repeated bitterly. "You think it was for the best that I spent all these years thinking my son was dead, that he was taken from me, when he was just hidden?" "I didn't have a choice," Dr. Hargrave said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your father made sure of that. He promised me that it would all be for the greater good, that you would never need to know the truth. But I can't keep this from you any longer. You deserve to know what happened to your son." Lydia could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she stepped closer to him. "Then tell me. Tell me everything." Dr. Hargrave paused for a moment, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. "It's not an easy story to tell, Lydia. It involves more than just your father and me. There are other people involved, people who would go to great lengths to keep this secret buried." Lydia didn't hesitate. "I don't care who's involved. I need to know. I need to find my son." Dr. Hargrave took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of years of secrecy had finally caught up with him. "All right, I will tell you. But you must promise me that you will be prepared for the truth." "It will not be easy." Lydia nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "I'm ready. I just need to know where my son is." The old man closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then, with a voice full of regret, he began to speak. Lydia sat in stunned silence, the words that Dr. Hargrave had spoken hanging heavy in the air between them. The room felt colder now, as if the very walls had absorbed the weight of the truth he had just revealed. Her mind was racing, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. She had known there were secrets, dark, buried secrets, but she had never imagined this. Dr. Hargrave's eyes were downcast as he continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "Oliver was never gone, Lydia. He was taken. Your father had a plan that involved keeping him hidden away from you, hidden for his own protection. There were powerful people involved, people who didn't want him to grow up, to inherit what your family had built." Lydia's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? What protection? What was my father thinking? Your father knew that there were dangers. People who would stop at nothing to control everything your family had. They knew about Oliver, and they wanted him gone. But your father wasn't willing to let them win. So he made a choice that broke his heart, but he thought it was the only way to keep Oliver safe. Lydia's head spun as the pieces began to fit together. She had always known her father was a man of secrets, a man who had his own way of doing things. But she never imagined that he would go to such lengths, that he would have hidden her son away for so many years. She had spent so long mourning a child who was never truly lost, a child who had been kept from her by the very man who was supposed to protect him. So, where is he now? Lydia asked, her voice trembling with desperation. Where is my son? Dr. Hargrave hesitated, his eyes darting to the fire before locking with hers. He's still alive, Lydia. He's been living under another name, in a different part of the country. Your father arranged for him to be raised far from Bath, in a place where no one would think to look. He's safe, but he's been kept in the dark, just as you have. He doesn't know the truth about his past, about who he really is. Lydia felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the fear of what this truth might do to Oliver. How can he not know? How could anyone keep that from him? Your father's plan was meticulous, Dr. Hargrave explained. He arranged for Oliver to be adopted, raised by a family who would never ask questions. But there were things your father couldn't control. There were people who knew too much, people who wanted to make sure the secret stayed hidden. Lydia's heart pounded as the enormity of the situation settled over her. What do I do now? She whispered, the weight of it all pressing on her chest. How do I find him? Dr. Hargrave stood up slowly, walking over to a nearby desk where he picked up a piece of paper. He handed it to her, his eyes filled with a sadness she hadn't noticed before. This is the address where he's been living. It's in Yorkshire, far away from here. But be careful, Lydia. There are still people who will do whatever it takes to keep you apart. Lydia took the paper from him, her hands shaking as she looked at the address. It felt like a lifeline, a thread connecting her to the son she had never stopped searching for. The truth had been so close all along, and now it was within her reach. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. She couldn't find the words to express the gratitude she felt, nor the fear that was beginning to take root in her heart. This was the moment she had been waiting for, but it was also the moment that would change everything. She turned to leave, her steps slow but resolute. As she walked toward the door, Dr. Hargrave's voice stopped her. Lydia, he called softly. She turned back to face him, her hand resting on the doorframe. You should know. Your father didn't do this because he wanted to control you. He did it because he loved you and your son. He did it to protect you both. But in the end, the secret he kept from you, it cost him everything. Lydia nodded, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. The man who had raised her, the man who had been both her protector and her prison, had made a choice that had shaped the rest of her life. And now, all of it was about to come to an end. The door creaked shut behind her as she stepped into the cold, the wind biting at her skin. But for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of warmth. Her son was out there, waiting for her, and she would stop at nothing to bring him back into her arms. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, danger, and more secrets to uncover. But Lydia was ready. She had been ready for this moment for her entire life. And now, with the truth in her hands, nothing could stop her.